opportunities, nearly 10 million gospel opportunities all over the world, because if you've been a part of this, and you've been here, you know that every box that goes out to the world, out to a kid, comes with the message of the gospel. And not that there's just like a pamphlet inside of the box, but those delivering the box will be sharing the gospel with all of those that receive these boxes. And so that statement is it couldn't be more true. It is an opportunity for a child to hear the gospel. And so I thank you for what you have already done. And if you have not taken a box yet, there's a few left out there, and you have like a day to fill it up and bring it back. But we're going to spend some time here in a little bit just praying for those children that will be receiving these boxes in hearing the gospel. And so if you have a Bible, go to 1 Peter chapter 2. I'm just curious, do I have any fellow introverts in the room? This is the wrong question to ask, isn't it? It's like, really? You're asking me to raise my hand? Yeah, so that's exactly what I thought I would get, about 4 of you. And I know like probably half the room are introverts. But yeah, I don't know if this is the experience of all introverts, but it seems to have been my experience my whole life, that whenever I'm in a room with a lot of people, I most often feel like I just don't belong. And it has nothing to do with the people that are in the room. It just happens to to be that there's people in the room that I think a lot of introverts share this. It just feel like that I just don't belong here, and it's just some of you guys are going, "Well, dude, you picked the wrong profession." And I know, I get that. But that's not just the experience of introverts. We have all felt this way before. We have all felt at one time in our life or another, probably many times in our life, that you've been in a place, you've been among a people, and you just feel like you don't belong. Like, I'm in this space, and I just don't belong here. I don't have much in common with these people in this place, and you kind of feel like these are not my people. This is not where I belong. In my D group, a lot of the conversation that is going on, like before and after we meet, like when we're just getting in, everybody's kind of coming in, a lot of the conversation kind of tends to go to guns and hunting. And look, if you know me, that's just not my lane. I just don't know. It's not that I have a problem with any of that. It's just I just don't know how to engage in that conversation. That's just not my thing. And so this past week, there was conversation about I don't even know what, but they were talking about hunting something and guns and all this. And so in the middle of that, I just said, so I've been listening to Christmas music and watching Hallmark movies. And one of the guys says, you know what, just get out. Just get out. But sometimes you just feel like you just don't belong. I bring that up because what Peter is saying in this letter is that you are exiles. We just heard it. You are sojourners and exiles, that you're in a place that you don't belong. And it's not because of a certain personality type, and it's not because you don't share common interests, but it's because you have been born again, is what he's saying. He's writing this to people who have been born again. And you're following Jesus among a people that are not following Jesus. You're in a place where where following Jesus is just not the way of that culture. And so it doesn't matter what common interest you share. Followers of Jesus, when you become a follower of Jesus, you get a new identity. You get a whole new purpose. You're following a new king, and you have new desires to live a new life. And that life just doesn't make any sense to the people around you that are not following Jesus. And so for all of your life, you will be tempted, as you follow Jesus, you will be tempted to fall into the way of the world, because it's into the majority. into the way of your culture. And then when you do not fall into the way of the culture, you will be mocked for it. And this is what Peter is responding to. This is what Peter is getting at in these next two verses that we're in chapter 2. Because Peter's going, look, don't be surprised by that. Don't be surprised when this comes. This is the reality of following Jesus in a place and among a people who do not follow Jesus. So then what do we do? How do we respond when the temptations of the way of the world, the way of the culture are coming at us? And then when we don't give in, we're being mocked by those who are a part of that culture, part of that world. How do we respond? And Peter's going to give us, in these two verses, in verses 11 and 12, he's going to give us two responses. He says, one, we fight, and two, we do good. One, we fight, and two, we do good. The first that he's going to say is that we fight. This is what he's getting at in verse 11. So let's look at it. In chapter 2, verse 11, he says, Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Now, anytime that we read something that is waging war against your soul, we should be perking up. We should be paying attention to that. Jesus said in Matthew 12, he says, For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? In other words, you lose your soul, you're done. When a person's soul is lost, that the whole person is lost. There's no coming back from that. When the war on your soul is lost, it is over. It's over. What is in the future of someone who has lost the war on their soul is a forever, an eternity of utter darkness and no hope. Imagine just coming to the place in your life where you have no opportunity to be born again to a living hope through Jesus Christ. Imagine coming to a place in your life when you know that there is no opportunity for you to be born again to an inheritance, an eternal inheritance in the new heaven and the new earth that comes through faith in Jesus Christ. Imagine completely forfeiting an eternal life with God and only knowing an eternity without God after these few short years are over. And Peter is saying that is what is at stake. This is a war on your soul. And it's a war that you're not going to hear about on your news feed. You're not going to hear about it on your TV. Nobody's talking about this at work or at school. Why? Because it's not something that seems to have anything to do with what's going on right now in your life. But make no mistake, it has everything to do with what is going on in your life right now. It has everything to do with what life will look like for you in 100 years from now, in 1,000 years from now, and 1 billion years from now. So where's this coming from? What is waging war on your soul? Peter says that it's the passions of the flesh. It's the passions of your flesh that are waging war on your soul. John said something similar in his letter. In fact, you would just go to the right a few pages in 1 John. In 1 John chapter 2, John uses the same word. It doesn't translate the same here, but it's the same root word, same Greek word. And here's what he says in verse 15. He says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. So he's going to get to the same argument here in just a moment. But let's just pause here for a moment and let's just acknowledge that this sounds really strange. All right, do not love the world. That just seems a bit strange because if you've read the words of Jesus, you know that there was a time where Jesus says God so loved the world. And here John says, and John's one of Jesus' disciples, and he's going, do not love the world. So what is this all about? Well, first of all, here's what John is not saying. He is not saying that you should hate the people of the world. That's not what he's getting at here. Sadly, there are too many Christians who think that they are being godly by expressing hatred toward people who are not Christians or reject Christianity. That is not what John is saying. And the other thing is that what John is not saying, that do not love the world does not mean that you stay away from the world. Now, I'm just going to say, growing up, this is what I heard. This seemed to be what Christianity was all about. Christianity was all about staying away from the world, avoiding the world, get away from the world. And for years, we made the goal of Christianity just to stay away, to avoid. And so then what do? We create our own kind of culture, right? We create our own kind of Christian little subculture. We have our own music. We have our own clothing. We have our own candy. I don't know if you remember these bookstores that the counter would say it had these things, these mints. And they weren't just mints. They were testaments, right? They were testaments. Why do we do this? Why did we create this culture? Because we won't want to love the world. But avoiding the world and staying inside of a safe Christian bubble is not what Jesus had in mind, because it keeps us from the mission, what God has put us here to do. So then what does the Bible mean when it says the world? The world that the Bible refers to here in 1 John is not something that somebody does, but it literally refers to a way of thinking or a system of values. Any thoughts or ideas that are removed from the glory of God, any thoughts or values that are removed from that are not centered on God and His glory, that is the world. That's the world. That's what the Bible calls the world. It's a set of ideas or values or thoughts that are not centered on God. And if those thoughts and conclusions are not centered on God, then what that means is that we've come to those conclusions and ideas and values based upon our own judgment. And it could be regarding a number of things. I mean, thoughts on sexuality, thoughts on money, thoughts on marriage. It could be anything, but any of these categories that are not centered on God, that we have ideas about these things that are not centered on what God says about these things, they are worldly. So John says this in 15. He says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, and here he's going to describe, here's the world. Here's what comes out of the world. The desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. The word that John uses here for desires is the exact same word, Greek word, that Peter uses when he says passions. The same word is the same, and so John just kind of takes it and he kind of just gives us a little bit more detail about what this is talking about. The word that is being used here is a word for deep desires. Actually, your Bible might say lust, and I think that's probably a better word. The lust of the flesh or lust of the eyes. It means a desire that has taken on too much weight. It's a craving that has taken on so much weight in your life that it controls you. And so John breaks it down in these three categories. The lust of the flesh. The lust of the flesh, this is when some good thing that God has created becomes so important to you that you either feel like you couldn't be happy without it, or it takes on such an important role in your life that you're willing to disobey the laws of God to get it. Let's for instance, let's take the example of sex. Sex is a good creation of God. It is created by God to be enjoyed in the way that God designed sex to be enjoyed. But when you say, well, I want it regardless of what God says about it. I don't care how God designed this to go. I just want to get it. That is worldly. When you treat it like an ultimate thing, that is worldly. And then he says the lust of the eyes, or the desires of the eyes. That's when you see something good in the world that becomes so important to you that you feel like you can't be happy without that thing. And you're jealous of those who have it, or you resent those who have it, or you make foolish decisions to get it. Like you put yourself in a bad financial situation where you go into debt in order to get that thing because I can't live without that thing. Or you refuse to tithe or to be generous because you can't afford to be generous because you've put it toward these things. Or you save so much, you put so much away so you can't be generous to fund. You can't fund what God is doing in the world. You can't fund what God is doing in the community because you lust after the things that you see. And then the third category that that John gives as the pride of life. That's when what you have or what you have accomplished becomes the thing that you take pride in. It becomes the thing that you boast in. And it happens in a couple of ways. One, you allow your accomplishments, you allow your stuff to become your identity. You begin to think that what you have or what you've done makes you better than somebody else. Or you can assume that these are the things that just they hold up your life, so you have nothing to worry about. And so you've got what it takes. I've got money in the bank. I'll be all right. I've got giftings and abilities. I'll be all right. I've got people that like me. I'll be fine. I can always make something happen because I've got what it takes. And Peter says this fight of the desires of the flesh, the passions of the flesh. This is a fight. It's not simply about doing the right thing or the wrong thing. This is a war on your soul. Every time you give yourself to the thinking of this world, every time you give yourself over to the passions, the desires of the flesh, every time you take a good thing and make it an ultimate thing, you have no idea what is happening. You have no idea what is happening. Peter says your soul is taking a hit. Your faith is taking a hit. You say nobody's getting hurt by this. I know it's just I made this decision. I know it's probably not the best decision. Your soul is taking a hit. You lose the war on your soul, it's over. It's over. Your faith is taking a hit. And Peter's going to want something so much that you would sin to get it. It's not worth your soul. That guy, that girl that you're willing to break the law of God to get him, to get her, he's not worth your soul. She's not worth your soul. That position, that title, that income bracket, that recognition, your soul is on the line. It is not worth your soul. Following Jesus among a people who are not following Jesus, you're going to be tempted to give in to just the thinking of the world, to give in to the passions of your flesh, to make something more than what it should be. Understand, it's not simply an isolated decision that you're making. It's war on your soul. But it's not just about abstaining. How do we do this? How do we live in this life following Jesus in a world and among friends and family and a culture that's not following Jesus? It's part of that is about fighting off sin, fighting off the way of the world. But there's something that you're moving toward. It's not something that you're just trying to stay away from. It's something that you're moving toward and something that you're engaged in, and that is doing good. Doing good. And so Peter says in verse 12, he says, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Earlier on in chapter 1, Peter takes the language of Jesus to describe what happens when someone becomes a follower of Jesus. He says that they are born again. This is the language that Jesus used. The best way to describe what happens when someone becomes a follower of Jesus is that they are born again. It's not enough to say that you've just decided to follow Jesus in a menu of options and say, okay, given all the options of which direction I want to go with my life, I'll take the Jesus option. It's not enough. That's not what's happening here. If someone believes in Jesus, if someone believes in his death and his resurrection on behalf of their sin, that only happens because God has done something in them, giving that person the ability to believe that. I was talking to someone this week, and I was just sharing the gospel with him, and I said, do you believe these things to be true? Do you believe that Jesus died for you, that he died in your place for your sin? And he said, yeah, I do believe that. And I said, do you believe that he rose from the dead in your place? And he said, yeah. I said, that's crazy, isn't it? You've never met this guy. You've never known anybody to raise from the dead, have you? Only God could make you believe that. This is something that God does, that God works inside of you, that God does, that he makes you a new person, gives you eyes to see and faith to believe, and God begins to do a transforming work inside of you, inside of this person, making them more and more like the one that they are following. And listen, and one of the tests to know if this has actually happened to you, if you've actually been born again, it's that what God is doing on the inside is spilling out and making its way on the outside in the way that you live. Because what God is doing on the inside, what God does on the inside, he changes your desires. He changes your loves. He's changing what is most precious to you. John, again, tells us in 1 John that you begin to actually, when God does it, if you're actually born again, if God does this to you, that one of the evidences is that you'll love the Bible. You'll actually love the commands of God. That this is true for those who have been born again because of what God is doing on the inside. He's giving you new desires and new loves, and one of those loves is the Bible. You'll love the commands of God because you know that it's the commands of God, that these things, they show me the way life was meant to be lived. The commands of God are the way to my greatest joy, my truest joy. So then the Bible isn't drudgery for you. You love the Bible and you gladly live out the way of the Bible. In particular, it changes the way that you love others. You live this out in the way that it says to love others. You're patient with others. You're kind. You don't use people for your benefit. You don't lust after them. You don't lust after what they have. You serve. You forgive. You put their interests before your own. You live on less so you can be generous toward others. You love your enemies. You care for the widows and the orphans. As God is transforming you on the inside, these are the things, if you've been born again, that become visible on the outside. And Peter says, and the people around you that are not following Jesus, take notice. They see it. But then he says, but there's a tension here. There's a tension. They see it, but it says this. He says, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. That when people watch your life, when they see you living your life in the way of Jesus, as it went with Jesus, as we've been saying ever since we saw Jesus being called the cornerstone, that we said as it goes with the cornerstone, so it goes with the rest of the house. And so as it goes with Jesus, so it goes with those who are anchored into Jesus. And so as it went with Jesus, so it will go with you. Some will see you live like this, and some, when they see you live the way of Jesus, when you're living out what God is working in, they will look at your life and they will be drawn into this. And there will be others that will look at your life and they will resent you for this. It says when they speak against you, not if they speak against you. It will happen. It's going to happen. People will resent you. They will look at your life. They will look at you forgiving others, loving others, being generous, and they will resent you for it. Jesus lived in this world and people could not figure him out. They could not understand why or how he lived his life in a way that wasn't like everyone else. He didn't fall into the way of the world. He didn't fall into the way of his culture. Some loved him for it and some hated him for it. And so it goes with Christians, those who have been born again, because of the way you live. People cannot figure you out. They can't figure you out. Now listen, understand that Christians are Christians because Christians come to understand that the only way that they could ever connect with God is by admitting that they're weak. The only reason that they could connect with God is because they come to the place where they realize that their goodness is not enough. This is how Christians become Christians, that they realize that I'm not good enough and I'll never be good enough, that I need the goodness of somebody else to make me right with God. I need the goodness of Jesus. But listen, if you're a Christian, you came to see that. There's no way you can become a Christian without seeing that. But before you became a Christian, that's not what you thought. Before you became a Christian, you thought that the only way that you could ever connect with God is if you lived a good enough life for him to receive you. I just got to be good. I've got to be good enough. But that's not it. It's only those who admit that they never could be good enough and then repent of the life that they lived. They are the ones who God receives. But just like you once thought, people on the outside think that it's living a good life that gives them a shot with God. The people that you encounter, people in your home, the people at your work, the people in your class, at your school, the people around, your neighbors, they think that if I've got a shot with God, then I've got to live a good enough life. So when people hear you say that you are a Christian, and they hear you say that you know God, what they hear you saying is that you think that you have achieved some level of morality or goodness that they haven't been able to receive yet or achieve yet. So then don't be surprised when you live the way of Jesus that people resent you for it. They don't understand who you are and why you live the way you live. And unless God reveals it to them, they cannot understand. But there are some who will see the way that you live and they will be drawn in. And they won't be drawn to you, they'll be drawn to God. This is what he says in the second part of verse 12. He said that they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. Your good deeds, you working out what God is working in. It's what God uses to draw people to himself. Because the truth is, more times than not, your words are not going to be enough. Where there is belief, there are words spoken, but there is no transformation, it's worthless. So then if you can talk theology and you can talk morality, but have not been transformed by that belief in your life, then it doesn't mean anything. And so what happens, we have seen the church lose its influence and respect in the world because we've said, this is what is true, this is what is right, but in our churches, there's no difference in debt rates, there's no difference in divorce rates, there's no difference in how we give to the poor. Oh, we can talk a good game, but if we're not doing it, we're a joke. You and I are living among people who are in total darkness. And many of them are our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, a husband, a wife, a mom, a dad, a son, a daughter. And some of them will never know their need for Jesus unless they see the way Jesus has transformed your life. And how does that happen? By seeing you live a life that is being transformed by Jesus. Peter is saying that what you say and how you live will not make sense to the people around you. So what is it then that will change people's minds? What is it that will validate your faith? He says it's your good deeds. It's your good deeds. It's the way that you live. It's not your social media posts. It's the way that you live. It's not your arguments. It's not your complaining. It's the way that you live. It's your good deeds that will convince them. That's what God will use to reveal the power and the reality of the gospel. In other words, I think what Peter is getting at is, hey, how about we do less arguing and complaining and just do more good deeds? How about serve somebody? How about take the initiative in reconciliation? Instead of complaining and arguing about the world calling Christians racist and judgmental, how about we invite people into our homes who don't look like we look and who don't believe the way we believe? Not as the subject of your next Facebook post, but as evidence to those around you that God is real and Jesus really does transform our lives. That people who cannot make any sense of your life would see your good deeds and glorify God. So in John chapter 17, Jesus is praying right before it's all getting ready to go down with his arrest and his crucifixion, his trial and crucifixion. And he prays this fascinating prayer in 17. I tend to refer to it a lot. But in verses 18 and 19, as he is praying for his disciples and he's praying for us, those who would become his followers, here's what he says. He says this in his prayer. He says, God, as you have sent me into this world, so I have sent them into the world. And for their sake, I consecrate myself, or I sanctify myself, or I set myself apart, that they also may be sanctified or set apart in truth. I'm sending them out, he says, that they may be set apart in truth. He's not praying for his followers to go out and be eloquent and being able to defend well. And there's a place for that, and Peter's going to get to that. But that's not what Jesus is praying for. He's not praying that we would be eloquent. He is praying that we would live lives that are set apart. Set apart. People don't care so much for your words. They want to know, does this work? Has it changed you? And so I would ask all of us this morning, are you holy? Is it obvious to your family, to your friends, to your neighbors, to your coworkers, to those that are in your school? Is it obvious? I can't put my finger on them. I don't get them. I don't understand their life. To your friends, your family, those who don't believe what you believe, is your life an invitation to the reality that what you say you believe is true? Does your life invite others into the gospel? If not, are there desires that have become so strong, so important to you? And listen, in good things. Desires for good things. But they've become ultimate things. You know, in our culture, it seems as though what is worthy, what everybody wants to celebrate is if you put family right at the top, over and above everything else, then that's honorable. Jesus brought family down and said, if it's not Jesus, if it's not him, then it's an idol. As something, how there are desires that have become so strong, so important, that what others see in you is just not so much different than what they see in themselves. That you may say some things about faith, but the reality of your life actually betray what you say. Listen, this is serious stuff. Peter is saying, this is the war that is on your soul. And you can fake it. And you can hide it from everybody else. But there is coming a day, the day of visitation, where it will be revealed. And so fight. Fight against the passions of your flesh. And because this day is coming, do good so that your friends and your family and your neighbors and the world around us would see and glorify God on that day. Let's pray together.